Hello everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Andy Lapsa. Andy is the co-founder and CEO of Stoke Space Technologies, a company focused on sustainably scaling the space economy. He began his career at Blue Origin, developing the BE4 engine before leading the BE3 and BE3U engine programs. In 2019, Lapsa and co-founder Tom Feldman created Stoke with the goal of building fully reusable launch systems. Andy, welcome to the Future Space.
Thank you for having me.
What would be your 3 words that capture the essence of space?
It's a great question. I think for me, the first one is wonder. Anytime you get out into a vast expanse, it always makes you feel small. It makes you reflect, makes you very introspective, and it's inspiring. And I think I've never been to space, but I would imagine that going to space is the ultimate version of that experience. And so, wonder is word number 1. The next one is potential. I think there's an enormous amount of potential in space that has yet to be realized. Space is a very unique domain for multiple reasons. One of those is that it gives a global purview that you don't get from anything, any observations on the surface. So when we start to think about what's happening with our Earth, how is it evolving, we can take point sensors on the ground, we can lay instrumentation around the ground, but it's very hard to get a global sense of macro trends from those point sensors, and space is very unique in doing that. It has a global purview to provide benefits to people on the ground. So, the obvious one is global communications networks, right? Starlink has completely changed the game with how humans can access data around the world. But space also has, in physics, anytime that you can go to zero or go to infinity, interesting things happen. If you go to high enough pressures, carbon becomes diamond. It's amazing. If you go to higher and higher pressures, you start to get into nuclear phenomenon. So interesting things happen at the extremes. And in space, you have zero gravity. You have this extreme of physics. And there's what I would call a strong but scant amount of research going into very interesting things on crystalline structure. In zero gravity, you have no convective currents, right? So you can do things that you simply can't do on the ground, whether that's crystalline growth, pure crystalline structures, protein growth. There's, like I said, several families of very strong but scant research, and the reason it's scant is because we're just very bad as humans getting to space and coming back. So there's just very little, small amount of research there. So I think that in many, many different ways, the potential of space is enormous, but unrealized. And then the last one would be it's a lifeboat. In the last something like 200 years, our human population has gone from something like 500 million to about 8 billion today. Unpack that statement. It's a remarkable statement. Tens of thousands of years of evolution to get to 500 million people. And then in a small number of generations, we go from 500 million to 8 billion. It's pretty unreal. And so what happens next? How do we keep the interesting future is if we can continue on that trajectory. But the Earth at some point, there's debate about what the Earth carrying capacity is, but at some point we outgrow the Earth. And what do we do then? Hopefully we're prepared for it, and space is the answer in many different capacities. And depending on the timeline that you look at, maybe we're orbiting centers or maybe we're out among the stars, right? Whatever it is, space is the outlet. So lifeboat is my 3rd word.
It's interesting. There was actually more wars back in a time where there were fewer people on Earth. Like if you put yourself 300-400 years ago, looking at the state of the world and how people are competing for resources and all the wars that were happening, and you make a linear projection and say, well, there's going to be way more conflict, and yet it's actually the opposite. We reached the point where there was a certain understanding of cooperation, and it's going to be really interesting now as we go to space and we take that forward, how we going to manage that growth. I remember one of the last times where we thought we were reaching the end of it, and it was all about fertilizers, right? Nitrogen. We had reached a capacity to producing food until we realized, we can take nitrogen from the air and then we can create fertilizer. And now we feed billions of people, and we're looking at a limitation right now. How confident are you into the solutions that are ahead of us to fixing some of the problems that we have right now?
I think there's some low-hanging fruit that space really helps us solve. So, for example, you mentioned agricultural efficiencies. I think that space, especially as our imaging, our multispectral imaging gets better and better at high resolutions, we can now do very meaningful agricultural sensing to increase crop yields, to manage water supplies. Did you know we still today don't know how much fresh water supply exists on Earth? We don't know that. And there's a NASA mission right now that is designed to kind of unpack that. But things like water supply, seasonal water supply, can be mapped and predicted much better. So obviously in the first world countries, we have methods to do this, but elsewhere not really. And as we kind of make these sensing mechanisms more ubiquitous, we can do things like track water supply, predict drought, react accordingly. We can do things like when we have crop diseases, we can track and potentially stop some of those things that really wipe out a lot of crops. We can do informed crop rotations and all kinds of things, right? That multispectral sensing really allows us to do a lot better. And so I think there's some improvements, very near-term improvements we can make from an agricultural standpoint. How confident am I that we can find these solutions so that we can continue expanding? I have a lot of confidence in human ingenuity. Let me put it that way. I don't have confidence that we know what those solutions are. I do have confidence that we'll be able to continue to innovate and invent our way out of sticky situations.
I think that's what we do best. I mean, there are pros and cons for those skills, but as a species, I think that we've proven that we're constantly navigating uncharted waters, trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work. But when given the incentive to find solution, it's messy, but that's the value of exploration. That's the value of discovery, of curiosity, is you have to try, you have to make mistakes. And the only difference between a mistakes and innovation is just a hindsight. But the path to it is exactly the same. Andy, before we go to your journey and your love of space and how did you get into Blue Origin and now a Stoke, if I ask you what's the human story of space?
There's something in us that has to explore. It's not even an option. As a kid, you want to be going further. You want to explore new things. We kind of have this insatiable need to figure out the unknown, and space is the final frontier. And I think, as we move out into space, I think that we'll discover that there's actually much more. It's not one single final frontier. We'll move further and further out, and there will be additional frontiers as we go. But it is the next, last, obvious step for us to take. And so that kind of instinctive drive is the root of the human story of space. And we're just really lucky to be alive now and starting with the space age in the 50s and 60s to be alive and be part of it.
It's a very exciting time. We're about to open a door to an entire new understanding of the human experience. That leap that is about to be made will create an entire new field of opportunities and possibilities. It's a huge one, going from planet to multiplanetary, the same way that it was from single cell to multi-cell. It's just exploded on the evolutionary scale. And now we're about to take it from single planet to multiplanetary. And once that leap is done, then you can ride for a long time.
Like you said, it's an incredible time, I think, and we have just enough technology to have that optimism to be able to go and do it, right? We've had these transformative moments before, right? I mean, you go all the way back, the first fish to decide to walk on the sand, right? You're going from water to this completely new paradigm. And in science, you've had these non-incremental breakthroughs that completely change the human perspective on the world. The world went from flat to round, and that completely changes the view. The Earth went from the center of the universe to an orbiting rock around a sun. And one of my favorite books and photos is Pale Blue Dot, and kind of the introspection that Carl Sagan puts on it. But again, it goes back to the wonder component. And we're at this point where we can start thinking about moving to multiplanetary. It's fascinating. It's wonderful to be a part of.
Do you believe that, unfortunately, you cannot dissociate these breakthrough periods without the hardships that come with it? Like, the hardships are as part of that breakthrough, and if you take away the hardship, you don't have the breakthrough. Like right now, we have all these great opportunities and potential ahead of us, but at the same time, our world is going through this profound crisis of identity transformation, things that we took for granted now are being abused. Are the hardships a necessary incentive to push forward in those moments?
Hardships certainly creates urgency. So I think whether they're necessary or not, I don't know, but they certainly create urgency around the need to invent our way out of a sticky situation. There's no question about that. And I think that it means that a lot of good can come out of very challenging situations. That's where we innovate the best. When we're kind of boxed into a corner, we got to figure out our way out, and humans are uniquely good at doing that. And so I think hardship is a good inspiration.
Yeah, you need an incentive. I even remember back in high school when the teacher was giving you a homework and you got an entire month to do it.
Yeah, you're not starting it until the last couple of days anyway.
you wait until you have a few hours and then you get down to work. So Andy, you worked at Blue Origin for many years. Was space engineer always an objective for you, or you ended up going in space because the opportunity presented itself?
Yeah, my story was a lot less strategic than what you just described. I was interested in space as a child. In elementary school, I had, astronauts on my wall. I had the shuttle landing on my wall. I built model rockets. I was very innately interested in space. But in middle school, architecture was my thing. And in high school, I did math, I did physics. I liked those things, had a natural affinity for those. And so I said, hey, architecture is cool, but I like the math component too. I'll be a civil engineer. And then in college, I thought I was going to do civil engineering in college. I got to college and I said, okay, well, things that move are more interesting than things that don't move. So I went to mechanical engineering, and the later courses in mechanical engineering got into some fluid dynamics, and I really love fluid dynamics. Got excited about those. So that kind of naturally tied into aerospace. I went to graduate school for, fluid dynamics, turbulence, combustion, that type of thing. And those elements were mostly funded by aerospace applications. And so that kind of tied me back into aerospace. And then when I started to look for what was next for me, there were these two small little companies that at the time people really didn't know much about. One was called SpaceX and the other one was Blue Origin. And so I'll be totally honest with you. I had one internship in LA, didn't particularly like the LA area. And so I picked the company that was in the Pacific Northwest, which has, just an unbelievable amount of outdoor and activity, and just it's a really, really underappreciated corner of the country. But I came out here to interview, fell in love with the area, was super excited about what the company was working on, and that was enough for me. So it's interesting. It kind of went full circle, but not by intent.
Right now, Blue Origin and SpaceX have dominated their little niche, but they are struggling in that next big step. SpaceX with Starship has been facing a little bit more resistance than they anticipated. Blue Origin with New Glenn, although SpaceX is owning the Falcon 9, Blue Origin is really owning with the Shepard. Do you think that the next big step will come from a company like you or from another company, because maybe these companies have become too big or their own worst enemies? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, first of all, the entire space economy owes it to those companies for kickstarting this whole thing. We wouldn't be here talking about being multiplanetary. We wouldn't be talking about a commercial space economy if it wasn't for SpaceX and Falcon 9 completely changing the game. And not only in cost economics, but also availability of launch. So that's what's triggered the dream. It's rekindled the dream. I think SpaceX also very publicly challenged the way aerospace engineering and development was done, and for good reason. So there's a lot that we all owe to those. Both of them are innovating at an absolutely massive scale, and I think there's a role for that. I think both companies will be successful in the New Glenn and the Starship, and I hope that that's the outcome. At the same time, I don't think they're sufficient for what the commercial space economy and the government use cases as well. I don't think they're sufficient for answering the mail on both of those fronts. Any healthy economy needs competition. It needs multiple players. It needs a diversity in solutions. If you look at the aircraft aviation world, if you look at ground transportation, road transportation, ocean transportation, there's multiple players with multiple solutions that all need to work together in order to provide low cost and readily available access to space. So that's the way I view the macro The other thing that I would say is, to me, the inevitable end state, by far, the end state of this industry uses fully and rapidly reusable vehicles, right? There's two big cost drivers to launch. One is the cost of the vehicles, and the other is everything else. And the only way you can amortize both of those is by reusing a vehicle and by flying it a lot. So you're creating as many revenue generating events per year to spread all of the fixed costs, things like factories and launch sites and test facilities. All those costs, labor, need to be paid for. And so you can reduce cost of launch by flying more frequently. So you can spread all of those costs across more revenue generating events. Those economics are so powerful that the only end state of this industry is with fully and rapidly reusable vehicles. And so to me, it is a race to demonstrate that technology and demonstrate those economics. And there's a small number of people who are working on that, and we hope to be one of them.
The big challenge is more software related, hardware related, or the cost of it, or it's a bit of both, trying to figure out that sweet spot right now?
I think software is a force multiplier, right? We don't need to invent software in order to do this. It's a physical challenge to make fully rapidly reusable vehicles, for them to survive the heat and thermals of reentry, to come back down, and to be able to turn around and launch again without being inspected and refurbished. That's a physical problem that hasn't really been solved in a compelling way yet by anybody, right? We have not done that well yet as humans. And so that's an exciting problem to go attack. That's kind of the founding problem that our company is built to address. So obviously we think we have a very exciting solution to that. Software is the force multiplier to be able to do that faster and better. So we can use software in engineering and design. We can use software to help our factory and operations move faster and smoother and have better traceability and configuration control. We can automatically track the digital thread of a part as it moves through from conception through the factory, through test, and into the vehicle. We can use software to monitor the health of the vehicle flight to flight, and we can do that automatically. So software is an enabler. It's a force multiplier. It allows us to do more with less humans and with a smaller amount of time. The space programs of today are a small fraction of, in terms of manpower, a small fraction of what we employed to reach the moon the first time with Apollo. So literally a couple thousand people instead of hundreds of thousands of people. Software is the reason we are able to do that.
Or the recent politics of the world right now with the tariffs and the trades with different countries, has that put a dent into the growth of the company or the development?
Well, interestingly, the space companies in the U.S. are kind of by requirement heavily based on U.S. supply chain. So where we see an impact from tariffs is really, if we have a machine or infrastructure build where we might have materials that come from abroad, the tariffs would apply. By and large, our supply chain for the rocket is almost entirely domestic. So I think we're relatively insulated from that. There are other geopolitics that create urgency for us to develop space capabilities, and I think we're highly aligned with those, and to protect the interests of the free world. We have a lot of urgent work to do to maintain national intelligence and security to keep the free world secure.
If I remember correctly, when I went to visit you, I learned that 5 years ago, you guys started in your garage, you and Tom, and here you are now in this huge headquarters. How do you manage this growth? How do you keep your eye on the big picture, managing this transition from not just from little to medium to big, but in 5 years, you built something quite incredible. Any advices on managing that growth?
I think one of the skills that I've had to develop to do this effectively is to create very effective partitions in my brain. If you think about it all at once, it's entirely overwhelming. In order to manage that growth effectively, my role and the role of a small number of people within our company is to always be thinking about the next step, maybe 2 or 3 steps in advance. And so that when we are at that point, we're ready for it. So we think very intentionally about organizational design. That organizational design is different when you're, let's say, 20 people or less. When we were 20 people or less, we effectively had no management. Technically, I guess I was the manager, but we hired intentionally people just dripping with experience who we knew would basically be point them and shoot, and they will go and produce, and they're not going to take a lot of management. Beyond 20 people, things get a little bit messy and you have to start organizing communication a little bit better and coordinating activities. And it can't just be, everybody doesn't fit in the same room anymore. And so then you kind of layer a bit of management on top, and then that picture might work from 20 people to, let's say, 80 people or something like that. But beyond that, there's this additional level of complexity. And the point is, you always want to be thinking 1 or 2 steps ahead to be ready for the next phase of growth. That's true for organizational design. That's true for physical design. When we were growing, we started out just Tom and I in the garage, like you said, and we hired just a couple people. And it became very clear. This is, by the way, this is now in the thick of COVID, so nobody knew what was going on. But we were a small enough group where we were allowed to meet and whatnot, and we just felt this desperate need for a whiteboard and collaboration as we were going through a lot of these early trade studies. And so we got a small office. And then when we closed our seed round, we had 2 big things we needed to do: find a place to build and then find a place to test. And I remember our prior headquarters was called HQ1. It was about 20,000 square foot facility. And we were a team of 5 at that point. And we walk into that building and I look around and I was just like, this is way too big, right? It's just like, it's irresponsible for us to go into this building and buy off this lease at this point. And you put together the program plan and you're like, if this is going to be successful, and you have to bet on success, we're going to outgrow this thing in 2 years. It was very hard for me to wrap my brain around this idea of getting 20,000 square foot for 5 people, and yet it's already too small in 2 years. So we went forward with it, and sure enough, it was too small for us, and we had to, move into the next building. And the next building is 170,000 square feet. And there again, we're at this point where we're a pretty small team writing a lease for this huge building. And so, it's this balancing act. You have to make sure that the financing makes sense and whatnot. But if we're going to win, if we're going to do what we're talking about doing, you have to be ready for it.
You mentioned COVID, and not that I want to dismiss all the hardships and the tragedies that happened during COVID, but years later now, looking back, was COVID the net positive for the company in your development? Were you able to turn pretty much everything that happened into a constructive part of history of Stoke?
I don't know if it was a net positive or not. What I will say is that every company at every time, you get your own deck of cards. Every person in whatever they're doing gets their own deck of cards. And it's your job to be successful regardless of what you have in your hand. So COVID is something that we were dealt with. On the one hand, we were so small that we didn't have to deal with all of a sudden scrambling for our workforce to work remotely. That was just kind of native to us. We built our tech stack knowing that we would have to be able to work remotely or on site. So we kind of benefited from that. At the same time, that was right when we started to go out and look for funding. The market had just crashed. Every single investor we'd ever talked to, which, by the way, this was hard on our journey. We left. We were both technical people. We had no network in the financial world. We had no idea how to raise money. So we had to figure that out. And we had to figure that out right during the brunt of COVID. And every person we talked to is like, either this is completely out of the box for them, there's no way they'd ever invest in something as crazy as this, or, hey, cool idea, but I'm just trying to get my portfolio companies to survive, and so we can't invest anything for X amount of time, right? So it made fundraising really pretty difficult in that first year. So you get your own deck of cards. I don't know if it was a net positive or not, but we were able to fight through.
What was the motivation behind it? For you to leave a job, engineering, where the problems are there, right? They're in your face. You just have to figure it out. 2, stepping outside of your comfort zone and taking this beast of fundraising, managing, building a company, all things that are not extremely engineering-like. What was the motivation for you to take on this journey?
I knew that I was ready to move on to what was next for me, whatever that would be. This was kind of when I did this exploration was 2019 for myself. And at that point, we were in this kind of height, some might say a bubble, new space activity. There's a lot of investment flowing into the area. And there are a lot of different companies out there trying a lot of different things. And that's fantastic, right? That's very exciting and a dynamic environment to be in. My honest objective was to figure out who I thought was going to be the winner and go and join them. It was never to start a company. However, in order to do that, I have to pick the winner. And in order to pick the winner, I have to have conviction on where I think the industry is going in the long run. And so, after thinking hard about that, I just gained full conviction in full and rapid reuse. I thought that that's the only interesting problem left to solve, before the space economy really breaks open. And interestingly, at that time. I didn't see any companies who were really focused on that problem. I think in order to pivot into it, it requires a full restart. And so once we had that conviction, I had, started talking to Tom at some point in this progression, and both kind of agreed it's not out there yet. It has to exist. Why not give it a shot ourselves?
So what was not out there, or what is not out there, in compared to SpaceX, Firefly, Blue Origin, and the others? Where is Stoke in that mosaic of vehicles?
The key is full and rapid reuse. That has to be done, and that has never been solved by the industry. So Falcon 9 does partial reuse. New Glenn's designed for partial reuse. Starship will be designed for full reuse. Starship was earlier in its development at that point. But the piece of the puzzle that's never been solved, the reason we don't have full reuse, is the second stage of rockets are typically 2 stages. First stage goes up. On Falcon 9, it comes back and most missions lands on a barge. But the second stage is the thing that actually continues to orbit and delivers payload to orbit. And the second stage is just thrown away. On most missions, it will eventually, drop back in the atmosphere, burn up, and, pieces land in the ocean, but it's all burnt up. And so the second stage is the part of the problem that's never been solved. We have not developed a reusable second stage. Probably the closest thing we've had to that is shuttle. And, shuttle required 30,000 person hours between every single mission to inspect and refurbish the heat shield. Just the heat shield, right? It doesn't answer the mail for full and rapid reuse. And so, that's the last big puzzle piece or a domino to knock down before we have the capabilities of full and rapid reuse. And the reason the full and rapid reuse is so important is not only you're amortizing the cost of the entire vehicle, but it is the thing that allows you to fly more and more frequently every single year in order for availability to go up to customers, option value in terms of orbital selection to go up to customers. That availability is important, but also it drives costs lower because it allows you to spread your fixed costs as many revenue generating events as possible. And so that problem is only being worked on by SpaceX. Nobody else is working on a reusable second stage. And so we want to be that company that stands up and finds a solution.
And where are you right now? Are you guys going to be flying soon?
Yeah, so we've architected the vehicle. We've done, what I would say is we've done demonstrations of the major systems and subsystems from tip to tail on the vehicle, from fairing design to second stage, engine, heat shield, and system architecture. The engine is developed. The second stage, we flew a full-scale prototype, vertical takeoff, vertical landing, modest flight to demonstrate a lot of the different subsystems and a lot of the new kind of technologies that we bought off for the second stage. We've built a brand new first stage engine, highest efficiency in its class, in order to make this reusable mission possible. We've developed the manufacturing methods and we've proven those out for the first stage structure. So all of those pieces are now coming together with a focus on our first orbital flight. At the same time, been through our headquarters. We've built from scratch a pretty capable state-of-the-art facility for, let's say, engine testing and other high-energy tests, whether it's for stages or for components or whatever. And then in October, we broke ground for our launch complex in Cape Canaveral, and that construction is going very rapidly and will be ready, basically have that online by the end of the year.
So you're going to be flying before the end of the year or shortly after?
I think it'll be after that at this point, but we're going as fast as possible. In the industry, we're going when it's ready. That's the deadline. No, we're going as fast as possible in order to be ready, as soon as we can.
The reason why no one except you and SpaceX has been going into that second stage is basically the challenge of re-entry. Going up, that's not really the issue, but it's coming down, trying to survive the re-entry. That is the most challenging item that you have to solve. Is that correct?
Yeah, you have to solve the re-entry component and you have to do it with enough performance margin. You're now asking the second stage not only to get to orbit and deliver something, but you have to add stuff to the vehicle in order to survive this reentry. You have to reserve propellant to do a deorbit burn. You have to add a heat shield. You have to do stable and controlled flight through the atmosphere rather than just tumbling in. You have to eventually land, which either takes additional systems or some propellant or whatever, right? So you have to not only physically survive those things, but you still have to deliver the second stage mission, which is a very hard mission. We're in this gravity well, and with chemical rocketry, we're barely able to escape. We're very lucky as humans to barely be able to escape the gravity well without even thinking about reusability. And so with reusability, you have to find efficiencies both in design and with your propulsion, in order to have enough leftover performance to go and do the reusability elements as well. And that's the challenge. It's a vehicle architecture, and it's also a physical survival challenge.
We look at technologies today and then we look into the past. We make judgments when the world was going around in horses and like, oh my God, I can't believe the world worked like this before.
And by the way,
yeah,
that was not long ago.
I know.
It's just absolutely remarkable.
So 50, 60, 75 years from now, we'll look back at this time and looking at it in a very primitive way because we hadn't discovered a new source of energy or a new alloy for material. Are you aware that where we are right now will seem pointless some decades ahead of us?
Horses and buggies were not pointless, right? They made the world go round for a good long time. It's enormously important. And I think chemical rocketry is enormously important. It's the best thing we know about today. I think to do better than chemical rocketry, there needs to be a fundamental physics breakthrough that is not necessarily on our radar, right? The world of quantum is fascinating because we are starting to learn about it and to manipulate it, quantum entanglement, but we don't have any idea why it works, or we're just very new with it, right? Can that eventually turn into some mode of transportation or teleportation or, whatever, right? Like, who knows? But I think chemical rocketry is about as good as we can do with the physics that we know about today. And I think to do a quantum step or quantum leap better, some new physics needs to come out. And it's very unpredictable when that will come, but there's enough mysteries of the universe that remain where I am 100% sure we don't know all there is to know about physics, fundamental physics. And when the next Einstein comes and takes us from Newtonian physics to relativistic physics, many new things are possible. That's exciting.
Hence the value of exploration, because you never know where the answers are going to come. I have to make a parallel with not the discovery, but very much the focus on North America. When Europe was going on the full age of exploration, North America was not the intended destination. It was Asia. That's where they were looking. They were trying to find the passage that would get them to that area. And then on the way there, they discovered that there was this entire continent that made more sense to invest and to spend time on than going around. Andy, being mindful of your time, what would be Andy's 3 words of wisdom?
I don't know if I have a good answer here, but what I would say is to people in general to be curious in things and build things. I think increasingly we have infinite connection to the internet with computers in our pockets all the time. I think that it is easier and easier to slip into a passive observer mode, and it is harder and harder to motivate ourselves to build and create new things. And, that is the essence of humanity, is inventing and creating and building. And so that's one thing, is to stay focused on there. And maybe the second thing is to take some risk. Interesting things in life come from taking risks and seeing what comes out of those. And life's too short to not take risks and to play it safe all the time. So a third one would be to have fun along the journey, right? It's no point to it if you're not having fun. And that means a lot of times to learn to embrace and enjoy the struggle.
Yes, indeed. Learn the struggle, being stoic, focusing on the agency that you have rather than focusing on the past. It's always easy to blame. And this is one of the things that for me about our current attitude towards the environment and the past. If we want to judge the past the way that we judge it, then we have to accept we're going to be judged by the future in the same way. And yet we're all trying to figure things out. We're all trying to do the best that we can with the knowledge and with the priorities that we have. Ultimately, we all want to put food on the table. We all want to put our kids to school. And sometimes the incentive to achieve those priorities are not always black and white. So I think that we have to give ourselves, not to dismiss the mistakes and the urgency of solving the issues, but if we keep blaming each other, I'm not too sure it's the best productive strategy.
Looking backwards is useful for an educational purpose, but it very rarely solves the problem. You have to say, okay, given what we've got and where we're at, how are we going to move forward as best as possible? And it's super important. You're right.
Well, Andy, I wish you and Stoke, the team, all the best. I hope you guys are going to be moving in a new headquarters, twice the size, within the next 2 years.
Well, thank you so much. It's getting tight.
I can't wait. I'm looking forward for the launch either end of the year or the beginning of next. But this is really exciting, and you guys are at the forefront. So congratulations.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
All right, Andy. Good luck.